Good afternoon, everyone. So I would like to welcome you all after our lunch break. I hope everyone had the time to refresh a bit before we start and deep dive into our second part of the day. Just before we start our discussion, let me start with some brief explanations and some logistical details. First and foremost, I would like to let the guests know that there is an interpretation available. So please allow me to say a brief few words in Hungarian. Azoknak a kedves vendégeinknek, akik magyarul szeretnék az előadást hallgatni, szeretném a figyelmüket felhívni arra, hogy van egy tolmács funkció a Zoom keretében, itt alul a kis földgömbre kattintva lehet a nyelvcsatornán váltani. Mostantól angolul fogjuk folytatni a beszélgetést, de ennek segítségével magyarul is fogják tudni követni azt. Thank you so much. And also just some few more technical details before we deep dive into a discussion. First and foremost, for those of the colleagues who would like to go to section 4, there would be another link available. So this panel will focus on the regional cooperation, but if you're interested in the non-governmental sector and the possibilities of the non-governmental sector, then please use the other link provided. Also, I would like to ask those of you who are not the panelists to turn off your to leave the cameras and the microphones also off, and also the videos for the speakers on, and then and also mute yourself if you're not talking. And with that, let me just deep dive into our discussion on the opportunities for regional cooperation in achieving a vision for climate neutrality. I would like to first start with presenting our distinguished speakers today. First and foremost, please welcome Mr. Stelios Grafakos, Principal Economist at the Global Green Growth Institute. Also, please welcome Alexander Snigotsky, Head of the Energy, Climate and Environmental Program at WISE Europe. Please welcome also Mr. László Örlös, Executive Director at the Western Balkan Green Center, and Ms. Gabriela Fischerova, Climate Action Director General at the Ministry of Environment of the Slovak Republic. My name is Lila Bartosek. I'm the Secretary General of V4SDG, Visegrádi for Sustainability, of your regional organization dealing with the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals in the V4 region. So it's my great pleasure to moderate today's discussion. And before we deep dive into the actual questions, I would just like to ask all of our distinguished speakers to just briefly introduce their work and their backgrounds so that we know what expertise are of our distinguished panelists. First, I would like to welcome Alexander to start.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for opportunity to participate in discussion. I coordinate energy and climate work at WISE Europa, and we're an independent think tank based in Warsaw. Over years, we have covered both cross-cutting climate policy frameworks like long-term decarbonization strategies, but also sectoral policies which are required to achieve deep emissions reductions and negative emissions in different sectors of the economy.
Thank you so much. Ms. Fischerova? I'm afraid you're muted.
My usual mistake, sorry. So my name is Gabriela Fischerova. I work at the Ministry of Environment of the Slovak Republic as a Director General for Directorate of Climate Change and Air Protection. I work on climate since 2000 actually as a full-time, and I cover both air protection and climate issues also on international negotiations and EU level. So this is in general. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Grafakos?
Hello, everyone. This is Stelios Grafakos from the Global Green Growth Institute. I'm a principal economist with the Climate Action and Development Unit based at the headquarters in Seoul, South Korea. So it's pretty late here, so bear with me. I'm working mainly on supporting our member and partner countries to develop their long-term low emission development strategies, and particularly on the technical side, and also assessing socioeconomic impacts of the decarbonization of the economies. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you so much for joining us. And Dan, we're really grateful that you spend your evening with us. And Dan, last but not least, I would also like to ask Mr. Erlich to present himself.
Thank you, Lila. Yes, so I'm the managing director of Hungary's Western Balkans Green Center, which is a development agency with an international mandate under the Ministry of Innovation and Technology of Hungary. And actually we are deeply involved in capacity building, technical assistance in the climate space in the Western Balkans region. So we have very much this regional cooperation angle.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I'm really glad that you mentioned, and this was the closing word of the introduction around regional cooperation. Just before we deep dive into the first question, I would just like to remind also the participants that it's possible to ask questions from our distinguished panelists by using the Q&A function, so that at the end we will allocate some time also to address all the questions that we received during the discussion. And then, speaking of regional cooperation, I think that it's really needless to say that obviously we have our really ambitious goals set on an international and also European levels, but without regional cooperation, we just simply cannot achieve them. And this is why I think highlighting the importance of regional cooperation is really the key when it comes to achieving, as it was also put as a title of this discussion, of achieving a vision of climate neutrality. I would also go a step maybe forward and say not just a vision, but actually achieving climate neutrality by the set date, by 2050. It goes without saying that our region, Central Eastern Europe, and or also more specifically the Visegrádi region, plays a crucial role, and it can transform into really a leading figure, hopefully, of the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and also more specifically climate goals by the indicated date. So I would like to first ask our distinguished speakers, what goals, in your professional opinion, can be identified as really the cornerstone of the V4 cooperation? Also, in view of which we can really expect a joint action from the Visegrádi region, from the governments, and also all the other sectoral representatives of the region. And I would first like to turn to Alexander.
Thank you. So I think that it would be useful to look at two perspectives. So one would be a discussion on setting up the European level policy framework. So we are just waiting, and soon we will see the Fit for 55 package from the Commission, which will be establishing the framework to reach 2030 targets, but also will provide foundation for where we go next, so to climate neutrality until 2050. So here I think that it will be something very useful to have also more internal regional discussions on similar challenges, for instance, related to different income levels compared to North and Western Europe, for instance, but also inclusive mechanisms which can ensure that instead of doing less and later, we can also contribute to rapid decarbonization, but with support from funds, but also know-how and cooperation with the rest of Europe. And here I think that this type of inclusive frameworks which are established in other areas like cohesion policy or some of existing schemes like modernization funds or ETS, solidarity provisions can be very useful templates for decarbonizing further and in more sectors. And at the same time, I would like to highlight the second part. So aside from European level policy frameworks and discussion, I think that one of the key areas for cooperation for our region would be developing low carbon infrastructure. So we know that there are several areas where we need to cooperate on cross-border level. So obviously it's electricity, so strengthening connections and achieving full utilization of our varying potential across the continent, across the region, but also hydrogen infrastructure, which is important to close the gaps in energy sector, and something which we also recently started working on and see increasing interest. So to close the gap for very hard to decarbonize sectors, so process emissions, which would be also CCS and CCU technologies, which also require infrastructure and can use from can be useful to cooperate cross-border. So we are not yet sure what kind of combination would be here for different technologies, but we know that if we want to achieve decarbonization by 2050 and start deploying infrastructure already in the coming years, we already need to think in terms not only of country, but also the whole region to ensure that we have low carbon electricity backbone, hydrogen backbone, but also cost-efficient infrastructure for other technologies. So these are 2 points which I wanted to highlight.
Thank you so much. Absolutely relevant points, and I'm really happy that they were mentioned. Thank you so much. And the same question would go to Ms. Fischerova. So what are really those cornerstones of the V4 cooperation, in your opinion, that can help us really achieve these targets, or at least be on the right track to achieve them?
Thank you. Yeah, it seems simple, this question, but of course, as it is usually the case, it has a lot of layers and complication when it comes to practical implementation. And also, when it comes to cooperation, we have a long history of V4 cooperation. I can say only for climate policy. But I'm aware of similar cooperations or processes also in other areas. I fully agree with Alexander when he said what are the key elements for really specific cooperation, which means electricity infrastructure, transport infrastructure for green transport like electromobility, hydrogen, which is a bit underestimated in my opinion, and maybe this is something where V4 can become a leader in making a regional infrastructure for some kind of hydrogen transport in, let's say, I wouldn't say near future, but let's say some middle term future. Another point, of course, there is a lot of, as I said, layers, international layer, I mean, international negotiations, EU level, where we are all waiting impatiently or patiently, it depends, for Fit for 55 package. Where I believe we start immediately as it is out, we start communicate pretty intensely about our positions or what. Well, I don't want to prejudge, but our previous experiences says that we would definitely have a lot to say on a new proposal from the Commission, and the more stronger our voice is, the better for us. So it's always good to have allies, and V4 is a very good vehicle for translating or presenting our concerns about EU proposals. Another point I wanted to make is that so far we were rather focused in our climate policy on mitigation. And I believe that more and more it seems obvious that adaptation would be also, if not even more of concern, then at least at the equal level. And this is again the field where we can strengthen our cooperation, especially when it comes to adaptation measures of greater dimensions, whether it is cross-border measures concerning water scarcity, or whether it is some measure concerning the agricultural techniques or forest protections, or, well, there is a whole range of measures or examples where we can really strengthen our cooperation, not only on diplomatic level or negotiating level, but in really concrete, specific actions and measures to be taken. That would be my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then I would like to ask Mr. Erlich to continue.
Thank you. I mean, very valid points. So as I explained, I'm sitting at the Western Balkans Green Center of Hungary. So we have this angle of regional cooperation, but certainly I would like to avoid the repetition of the very valid points from Alexander and Gabriela recently. So significant progress has certainly been made in several projects of regional nature and scope, which are of really strategic importance to expand regional networks, and certainly is focused for more and additional challenges. And I think that the V4 is really well placed to discuss all climate-related issues which are debated on the EU agenda, as well as on the V4 and V4 plus formats at various levels, be it preparations for the COP26 agenda, the European Green Deal, but also the EU 2030 climate policy framework, and the very interesting and wide-ranging topic of just transition in the V4 and Central and Eastern Europe more generally. So I think that the unique geographical circumstances and all the historical heritage that our region and all regions are having should really shape policy making, and potential regional projects of common interest or heavily debated topics, such as in our region, gas or nuclear energy, could also be assessed in the regional context. And obviously, close to our heart, the issue of decarbonizing the Western Balkans generally, in line with the V4 foreign policy. And I think that Poland made significant steps towards it in cooperating with the Western Balkans and Ukraine and Belarus. Hungary is also on the way to contribute to international and regional efforts in the Western Balkans. This is not a secret. I think that the Hungarian V4 presidency will aim to share joint V4 efforts in terms of knowledge exchange, knowledge sharing, relevant to the energy transition process of the Western Balkans. So I think that this will be a very nice and hopefully fruitful cooperation in terms of cooperating within the Visegrádi 4 countries, but as well between the V4 and the Western Balkans. So I stop here, but I hope that I will have more chances to talk about our initiatives that are contributing to regional efforts later on.
Absolutely, and really, I'm really happy that you mentioned also the Hungarian V4 presidency. I'll have a follow-up on that just in a moment, but before I do, I'd also like to ask Mr. Fakos to share his views.
Thank you. Being the last speaker, I don't need to repeat the very valid points that the previous panelists mentioned, addressing technological and policy level related issues. Just to add one important element, I think that could shape climate policy is learning by sharing experiences, exchange knowledge on policy, on climate policy matters, but also on technological issues. And I think we have very good practices, both at technological and policy levels in V4 countries. I could name a few. I'm not a regional expert, but I'm aware of some success stories. Obviously, having supported the government of Hungary to develop their long-term clean development strategy, I'm aware of the climate law that has been adopted by the Hungarian government. And I think this is a great achievement that provides clear signals to investors, to citizens, that the climate neutrality target should be achieved. So a very stable policy environment is really a prerequisite to attract investments. So this process could be shared with the other V4 countries and see how this could be further adopted by other countries, for instance. Another good example from the Czech Republic, the recycling of revenues from EU ETS auctions in investments in energy efficiency in buildings, which is a very successful program, I would say, at the EU level. So I think this is also something that other V4 countries could learn from and see how this could be further replicated. And of course, something that I guess most countries need to address, and Mr. Orlos touched upon, is the just transition process. There are regions that will be decarbonized, that are dependent on let's say fossil fuel industries. So they shouldn't be left behind. And there are already good examples in Hungary, in Poland, that could be shared and learn from those experiences. So sharing best practices, lessons learned is very important. Already the previous speakers mentioned about a cooperation on technological issues, innovation, creating hubs, technological hubs. E-mobility is also a great field. Having automobile industries in all countries, I think this could also engage the private sector, city governments, national governments to engage in this transformation of the transport sector, and create an e-mobility hub in the region. And of course, another topic that I think that was also touched upon by Mr. Orlos, but for me, I would like to emphasize further, is that climate action should be taken at the global level, right? So no matter how ambitious we are in Europe or in V4, we should make sure that other countries around the world also follow this low carbon, zero carbon, and climate resilient development pathway. GGI is at the forefront of this field, supporting governments. And we also supported the establishment of this, the Western Balkans Green Center. And I think this is a great example also from the government of Hungary, showing that regional cooperation and support of other less developed countries is a great way to develop through a green transition pathway. And lastly, sharing common values and objectives is also another way to, and history and heritage is also another way to explore and link with other countries. And doesn't mean necessarily that those countries should be at the same geographical region. Of course, V4 is the case, but I would like to bring the interesting initiative from the well-being economy countries that have formed, Scotland, Iceland, and New Zealand, that now collaborate around these common values, which is well-being economy, and going beyond GDP and talking more about the quality of the growth than the quantity of the growth. So I think sharing common values and objectives around climate policy could be certainly something that V4 countries could collaborate with, and I think also lead and show great examples in the rest of the world.
Well, that couldn't have been a better way to really turn to the next question. And also already it has been mentioned that as of the 1st of July, Hungary will take over the V4 presidency. And based on that, I think that it's really a great time to just step for a minute and really take a look back at how successful the V4 cooperation has been in the past 30 years. Because the Hungarian V4 presidencies are also at the same time when the V4 is celebrating its 30th anniversary, which really is a great coincidence. And I think that it would be really the great time to get as much out of the V4 cooperation as possible. And obviously what we could see in the past 30 years that obviously we had some really great successes, such as the EU and NATO acceleration, of course, and also accession. And also ever since then, there have been only like positive and really well cooperated efforts whenever it comes to the V4 collaboration. And I'd rather have a statement / question to the panelists, because right now it goes without saying, and also our distinguished speakers already mentioned how important geographically the V4 cooperation is, and also this is something inevitable that we have a cooperation among the 4 countries. But right now, when we have really lots of challenges facing the region, and one of them, and maybe one of the most pressing one of them, is obviously related to climate and climate policy, and steps have to be taken. Wouldn't it be really the high time to rethink really the approach, or to put something else also on the agenda of the V4, and really to turn it into really the cornerstone of sustainability cooperation? Because as, for example, we could have seen now in the last year when it comes to the Polish V4 presidency, that sustainability items has been put on the agenda. And also we know that, as also Mr. Erlős said, that the Hungarian V4 presidency also contains, the V4 presidency program also contains steps to be taken to accelerate the sustainability discussion. But what about the role of the business sector, and what about the role of the civil sector in this endeavor? Because in my opinion, it would be really high time to take a new approach, or to accelerate this approach of also involving more the business and the civil society aspects in this collaboration. How do you see now the role of the business and the civil society? And could this anniversary be the right time to really accelerate their involvement also in the sustainability implementation phase? And I would like to ask Ms. Fischerova to start, and also to reflect on how the governments can ensure the regional cooperation, and also that these business and civil society actors are more integrated in the government's approaches towards a more sustainable V4.
Thank you. I will start from the other side. That V4 was created 30 years ago after dramatic social changes here, and it was somehow naturally growing, and the cooperation evolved over time, mostly on governmental level, sometimes on some cultural level. I would be rather cautious in forcing some artificial body in business and NGO, especially from governmental level. This is the process which should come up from bottom up. But what we can do, or the government can do, is to show by the example, and to show that it works on governmental level, and somehow egg this idea to NGOs and businesses by creating some, but these activities already going on, maybe not under the V4 flag or something, some regional of platforms or forums for NGOs and businesses, like exhibition. Of course, now after the COVID or during the COVID, this was not possible. But the regional activities where businesses can meet, where NGOs can meet, or some other sectors, but to go for some, let's say, prescriptive V4 cooperation, this might be rather counterproductive. Nevertheless, I still think that V4 has its credit, and I have to say that I like logo very much, which covers all geographical, political, and somehow looking for the future, and or this is what I see it. So this was this is one of the examples where the cooperation could be inspiring also for other sectors. Back to the environment. Environment does not, or environmental problems, more to say, do not respect borders, and I think that this is also why we have to we have somehow get rid of these borders in mind, also in pushing for our future goals, and when pushing for our interests, let's say on EU level or on international levels. The situation in countries are different. I think Poland has different problems than Slovakia. Czech Republic has different problems that Hungary, and vice versa. But we all have a common goal, and this is to live in the region where the environment is acceptable, where it is not harmful, where there is a future for the next generation, and on that basis we can work on when it comes to individual, let's say, initiatives. It was already mentioned what kind of initiative it can be under the question one, but we have to bear in mind that not everything, or there is not necessity to act as a V4 for every single piece of whatever intervention. There are things which are more important for let's say Czech Republic and Poland. There are things which are more important for Hungary and Slovakia, but it does not mean that we have to act as one when it comes to certain policy. But what is crucial, and I think it was already visible, is that we all have one common goal in mind, and this is good for our region and to somehow have a stronger voice when explaining our concerns and our policies to countries which do not have, let's say, our historical experience or do not have similar socio-economic conditions and so on. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then I would like to turn to Mr. Erlich.
Yeah, I mean, certainly very important aspects, having the business sector and civil society on board. I think that today's conference is also a very good example of having civil society and think tanks on board for joint thinking. I would rather talk about the involvement of the private sector and business, which is obviously a crucial part of reaching the carbon neutrality goal. It simply cannot happen without attracting private resources. And I mean, more generally, the V4 cooperation is really not about institutionalizing issues. We have some joint efforts to build up cooperation in the form of institutions, but it is not really typical. And I think that if we look around in the world, not just in Europe, but elsewhere, but in Europe, the Nordic cooperation or the Benelux cooperation is really not about institutionalization, but about good initiatives, practical tools, mechanisms to join efforts. And that is what we are trying to do also here in the context of the V4. But turning back to the business sector part and the regional cooperation, I think that our initiative, which is really an initiative supported by or based on the best international practices, as evidenced and supported by GGGI. But the Hungary-led initiative, our center is really striving to build on the strengths and benefits of any regional cooperation can have, be it among the Visegrádi 4 countries or the V4 and the Western Balkans region in our case. So if you look at the underlying conditions of such cooperation, I think that we can see all the upside part benefiting participating countries. And I think that this is all the more important given the fact that climate change, as Stelios already mentioned, is a global problem that can only be tackled as a joint effort and as a joint ambition and cooperation. I think that those are the two phrases of today's panel discussion. So these are really topics, as I understand, very important to reach the joint goals. And given the fact that the EU cannot do it alone, and the EU is not the biggest problem in this field, I mean, the EU is just responsible for roughly 8% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So it is obvious that our role is relevant in terms of showing examples and attracting other regions and big emitters interest in joining efforts. And this is the point where technology hubs and think tanks and institutions implementing knowledge sharing are coming to the picture, showing the way that this is not only feasible, but also it can happen without damaging the economy, so that it will ultimately pay off thanks to all the technological progress and advantages of economies of scale. And I think that that the V4 is a fruitful cooperation in this context, as we closely cooperate in the region, also in the context of EU policies and in wider context in the world. As I explained in our case, in our initiative, the cooperation is going beyond our borders, not just Hungary, but the whole Central and Eastern European border. And we are looking at the Western Balkans region to gain mutual benefits in a region of strategic importance to the European Union and Central Europe. In terms of economic, political, and social aspects, of course. And actually, given the fact that these countries are in the run-up to their EU accession process, I think that our region, the V4 cooperation, can really show the way, given our recent track record in this process. So there is an obvious way to cooperate and build on the recent experiences. So I'm really happy that we are having this topic on the table today, because I think Hungary is clearly on the way to contribute to realizing real benefits from such a cooperation. And just to mention, and then I will conclude my recent intervention, just to mention a good example, maybe. So if we look at the situation in the Western Balkans, I think that combining efforts in the climate space is very important. If we look at the situation, for example, in Sarajevo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, look at the problem of air pollution there, or the situation with regard to coal-fired power plants in the whole region. I mean, I have statistics that 8 of Europe's 10 most polluting coal-fired power plants are operating in the Western Balkans region. So really, this is the region in Europe which is most heavily affected by the impact of climate change, and really strengthening efforts on climate in the affected areas is very much crucial. And we are, though with a relatively smaller size, our center as a Hungary-led initiative, combining efforts in V4 format, are trying to add to the international efforts on the EU level, on the regional level as well. And really to conclude, I think that, as I mentioned, to realize carbon neutrality, we need to mobilize private resources as well. Therefore, better regulation, improving the business environment is very much inevitable. I think our center is very well positioned to contribute to these efforts. Some announcements will come in the run-up to our V4 presidency in this regards, in the context of our new efforts in domestic, regional, and international cooperation to the benefit of the Western Balkans region. But I think that given the fact that this is a global problem, to all of our benefits.
Thank you, Dan. We will be looking forward to hearing more about these announcements as we get closer to the Hungarian V4 presidency. And also, as we know, just to a short follow-up to what has been said, obviously climate and climate action plays also a crucial role in the accession negotiations, as specific chapters dedicated to that. So we really hope that then the V4 can really be an example when it comes to sustainability cooperation or climate cooperation, and we can show the way to the other regional cooperations to follow us in this way. And just before I give the floor to Mr. Grafakos to hear his opinion about the role of the civil society and business in this endeavor, I just want to remind everyone that it's possible to send in questions using the Q&A function, so we can then allocate time at the end of the discussion to also address those questions that we receive. And with that, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Grafakos.
Thank you very much. Indeed, engagement with the civic society and the private sector businesses is very important. Actually, again, it's a condition for a successful policy formulation and policy implementation. And again, here, V4 countries can learn from each other and can share examples on engaging with the private sector and the civic society on developing those policies or engaging to develop their long-term strategies. And I will give here the example of Hungary that I had the opportunity to be part of the support team, let's say, and the private sector was regularly engaged and consulted in different consultations, the so-called climate breakfasts, where their views and priorities were considered, taken into account, and of course the Ministry of Innovation and Technology made sure to incorporate those, along with the three stakeholder consultations that included academia, civil society organizations, businesses, so on and so forth. So it was a good example of wide stakeholders consultation through developing the long-term strategy for decarbonization, something that could be shared again with other V4 countries. And I would like to emphasize this engagement with different stakeholders, because if we don't make sure that they support this transition, the zero carbon transition, then we may risk to derail the process. And I will give you an example. As you know, a few years ago, when the French government tried to put a tax, a carbon tax on fuels, and this really triggered this movement of yellow vests. And this was, from an environmental point of view, was obviously a good measure, but without taking into account the impacts to certain parts of society, and not engaging with them during the process of policy formulation. In the end, this policy was not adopted. So I think this is very important to make sure. Again, I will bring the issue of just transition here, because certain sectors might be affected, but we should make sure that these effects will be eliminated, and those affected sectors will be transition or transform to a greener, let's say, activities, and make sure that no one is left behind. And again, here we have good examples that could be shared. The World Resources Institute has a Just Transition Resource Center, where there are a good example from those cases. And there is a good example from the Czech Republic, the Restart strategy to coordinate 3 regions, energy and economic transitions, from Hungary, converting the Matra power plant into a diversified hub of green energy and industry. And an example from Poland, Walbridz, I'm not sure if I pronounced the name of the city correct. Apologies to the Polish colleagues. Delayed transition after coal mine closures. So I think there is a lot to learn also in that space, engaging again with the different stakeholders, with the civil society. And on the private sector engagement, and businesses, of course, should be the driver of decarbonization, making sure that, of course, we have the right policy environment there. I think we, for countries and region, have very high skilled labor force, and it's quite competitive in terms of labor costs. So I think that will be a great opportunity to attract foreign direct investments, which still the region doesn't rank so high. So I think there is great opportunity also for attracting further investments, creating green jobs, and boosting economic growth, green economic growth, not any type of economic growth. So, and last but not least, as was mentioned again by Laszlo, on the benefits, on the multiple benefits of the decarbonization that should be highlighted and communicated to the general public, to different stakeholders, to the private sector, and show and illustrate that decarbonization will be not only good for the environment, but will be good for the economy. So this should be communicated and understood well. I have some data to share here, but for the sake of time, I will not do unless there is time later on the Hungarian long-term strategy, just to emphasize that by incorporating additional benefits and avoided costs, those benefits outweighed investment costs of the decarbonization scenario versus the business as usual scenario. So there is a clear message here that should be communicated to different stakeholders, civil society, so on and so forth. I will stop here for now.
Thank you so much for your inputs. And then before we move on to the next question, I would like to turn to Alexander to also share his views on the role of business and civil society.
Thank you. So maybe just not to repeat all the previous points, I would like to come back to the role of the government before as initiative in stimulating this involvement of civil society, business, but I also think that expert community and academia would be also important here. So just to start with a very pragmatic point, I think that it would be useful to consider increasing resources allocated for the regional cooperation in a project form, and maybe to elaborate more on this. So I think that when we talk about knowledge exchange or having time to analyze policies, especially when we have suddenly big complex packages, it requires resources, it requires people who work on this issue for a longer time, who have experience and who have time to also exchange both within the country, but also within the region. And this is something which is not lost for many countries in Western Europe and for the EU as a whole. So if you look at their programs of support of the whole European Union on national level and sometimes on regional cooperation, they make sure that they have a steady support for various actors to engage and to build capacities, which is important once you have this very times like now, when you suddenly have to engage in 10 complex policy processes to understand what is happening and to come up with your own feedback, solutions, and implementation of policies, which we also now see that there's some differentiations in capacities here. So if you want to be proactive, we need to have enough people who have enough time and enough experience to actually engage in this type of work constructively, also to support the government to work directly in the government or to work with government as experts or provide feedback as stakeholders, which I think after years of transition, I think we are at a time when we can actually invest in this type of capacities, because this is something which strengthens our position as a region and then allows us to implement policies faster, more efficient, and maybe also negotiate something which is more win-win solution for both sides on the European level. And this also comes from our experiences, so we try to scale up, and I think we are rather successful in this area to scale up regional cooperation projects with several topics. But the interesting thing is that if we look at how we can do this, we can usually do this from European level funding, or from, for instance, Norway and EA funds, or from some other national sources. But if you have regional Visegrád funding, it's rather incremental rather than the full-scale projects comparable to European level funding. So this is something very pragmatic, and probably apologize for going into very pragmatic part, but this is not a chance by chance. But when we talk with French, German, Scandinavian colleagues, we usually have quite a full room of experts who have a lot of experience, and sometimes it's difficult to keep up, just because we need to allocate more resources on the national and regional level to achieve similar expertise, which would be, I think, beneficial in the long run for everyone. And on the side of business, I think we are also catching up. It's like organic process with businesses becoming more international, entering other markets, and understanding that they have to invest more resources in regional cooperation. And on the civil society front, I think there's always an interest in cooperating. But once again, this is the issue of how many people, how much time you can allocate to make sure that you actually have this type of cooperation. But otherwise, I would also like to say that the Visegrád countries are already doing this with funding for regional cooperation, but I think we can step up if you want to really have more experts, more joint positions, and quicker reaction to what is happening around the world, and also projecting our ideas, our perspectives in the broader region, on European and perhaps even global level. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all your inputs. And now that we have 15 minutes approximately left from this session, I would like to also ask another round of questions, especially related to the other aspects, because so far we've been dealing with why the V4 has its potential to really use this kind of environmental policies, or why the V4 has now its possibility to also involve the civil sector, the business sector, what the governments can do. But now that it's all clear, and I'm really, really glad that these points have been raised, and on multiple points, I think that there are really a lot of opportunity for cooperation. But like now at the end, I would like to ask whether do you think, or how do you think the social reception of these national climate policy measures are in the regional context? So to put it really bluntly, and I'm sorry for this, but are we ready to accelerate climate policies, to accelerate climate cooperation, both from the social and also from the economic aspects? Because as we know, sustainable development has 3 pillars, and we cannot talk about just environmental policies or environmental aspects without taking into consideration the social and the economic ones. For sure, we have all the sectors ready, and we have actors in all the sectors ready to work on these issues, and it's really timely. There is no debate on that. But just in a general public perspective, how do you think the reception of climate policies can be assessed in the region? Ms. Fischerova?
Thank you. Yes, if I compare it, the interest for climate change issue and the concerns even are much higher now than, let's say, 5 or 10 or even 20 years ago. So I believe that social perception of climate change is now on much higher level. Not only that more people know what it is, but the knowledge is deeper and more structured. This is not only just some, let's say, vogue or some new issue which evaporates after a couple of seasons for many of them. And especially among young people, the climate change became an issue for quite a long time. I wouldn't dare to say for the whole life. So, and they become to change their behavior. I can see it in my surrounding. You can see it in their activities, these Fridays for Future and so on. So this helps politicians to create and propose some measures which are not easy to take and even less easy to implement. And therefore, we really need the social acceptance and understanding. And this is where the help of initiatives like Fridays for Future were very helpful. On the other hand, and when it comes to region, we are close to each other. So this kind of initiatives spread like a fire, let's say. I can't imagine that something like that would happen in Czech Republic and wouldn't somehow penetrate to Slovakia or similar from Poland to Slovakia or to Czech Republic. So we are looking with high interest on activities on social in social environment on climate change, and this also helps that business starts to change. You can see now much more, for instance, cotton issues grown or the companies even put it into advertisement that this cotton was grown sustainably. Similar with chocolate, coffee, cocoa, whatever. So this is interactive process that in some ways the social behavior and demand shapes business, but on the other hand, business also in certain areas shape the social behavior, and this is where what I mean by this is, for instance, digital technologies and networking. Couple of years ago, I believe it wouldn't be possible to organize so quickly and so many people like we saw with this, for instance, for some climate meetings, because it took time, it took networking, there was not enough, let's say, people and interest. Now the social media are pretty helpful and, well, sometimes helpful, sometimes not, that this is not the subject of this debate. So frankly, V4 region is pretty small concern if you compare it to the whole world or to some other even bigger countries. Therefore, what happens somewhere on some end surely would reflect sooner or later, and very often sooner on the other hand. So we are, whether we want it or not, whether we like it or not, we are in one very, very crowded, let's say, space, and we have to be mindful of what is going on here or what is going on there, and count on it and use it or at least be ready to somehow react. So I think I went a bit to some philosophical fields, but hopefully it was relevant. Thank you.
Of course, it was relevant. Thank you so much. And now we have approximately 10 minutes left, so I would like to also turn to Mr. Grafakos to share his vision.
Thank you. Yes, Gabriela touched upon, I think, a very important issue because we talked about technological issues for decarbonization, but we shouldn't forget behavioral issues and the importance of those issues for a low carbon future. So it's not only to believe that we can technologically achieve and decarbonize, but we should also change our consumption patterns. We should change our diets, and all those things should be communicated. So on one hand, I think behavioral issues and behavioral science have a great role to play. And we see that also from studies that consumers, let's say in the energy consumption at homes, at the household sector, often could be more inclined to reduce their energy consumption if they get notified that compared to their neighbors, they achieved a milestone of reducing this amount of energy versus having a lower bill, which is more of a economic incentive. So this is just an example to say that it's not only the economic incentives, but also behavioral related aspects that should be taken into account and utilized in order to make sure that the general public is also part of this process. And talking about studies, another important issue here in the era of misinformation and disinformation, I think the building trust to science and communicating science to the general public is another critical element here. And I think this is very important. And being in my previous role in academia, I can say that academics need to engage more on communication techniques and make sure that the outcomes, because science has reached consensus on climate change, right? So those matters should be communicated in an understandable way. Of course, how to reach decarbonization might be a bit more complex, but again, I think we have I think the role of academia is very important here, how to engage more on policy formulation and communication of the scientific outcomes and research results to the general public. And here I would like also to say that we have some good examples. For instance, in Horizon 2020 research and development projects from the European Commission, now we see more and more emphasis on the dissemination aspects. Beyond the analytical and research part, we see a lot on dissemination, how you reach the general public, how you reach the different stakeholders, policymakers. So I think this is very important and it's changing. We are going in the right direction, but I think it's crucial. And again, as I mentioned before, communication of the benefits that really outweigh the costs, air pollution, health-related benefits, employment benefits, reduce accidents, avoided damages from climate change impacts. So it's no-brainer from an economic point of view, but we have to communicate that properly. And lastly, again, engaging in policy formulation, consulting with society, with civic society organizations. It's also very important to make sure that there is ownership and make sure that there is acceptance and implementation in the end of those long-term actually zero emission development strategies. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And also I would like to turn briefly to Mr. Erlos.
Thank you. Very briefly, really, I mean, I just can agree with that we cannot emphasize enough the importance of stakeholder consultation, but also the importance of stakeholder consultation and stakeholder ownership. I mean, communication is clearly important, but this is one aspect. The other one is where the government, through regulations, can really kind of incentivize and motivate society is also an important part. So these two have to go hand in hand to reach goals. I think that from this perspective, it just came to my mind the importance, for example, of a Hungarian system that is about attracting interests from companies and also the society, the so-called energy efficiency commitment system, the so-called EKR in Hungarian, which is about engaging with companies, but also end users to gain efficiency gains that can be counted in economic financial terms. So the communication part and the motivation part in economic aspects should go hand in hand. And in terms of stakeholder consultation, just a brief example on what we are doing in the Western Balkans. So it is really important for us, as I guess for every development agency with an international mandate, that we have to be based on demand, so that you have to have not also have to consult the local authorities and the society in multiple ways, but also really having meaningful feedback from them. And for that, you have to find the right ways to have those meaningful information for your purposes to build up a cooperation, a grant program, a real investment, or a technical assistance program that is really beneficial to the country, to the region, to the local society. So from this perspective, again, stakeholder consultation and a demand-based approach is important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Alexander.
Thank you. So I try to be brief. I think that in this context, 0 is a very special number. It's in many other cases. So I think over the last several years, we have seen significant shift in understanding and awareness of what climate policy means. So with saying that net zero climate neutrality is this goal, I think that the conversation shifted from whether we have to do it and when we have to do how much and if at all, to realization that we need to get to net zero at some point. And we're starting to discuss the timelines and how exactly we can make the climate math work, which is completely different framework compared to what we have seen, at least in Poland, over 5 or 10 years ago. But as my understanding is that in other parts of region and in Europe, there was not clear where are we going to end up within the several decades. Now it's different discussion. On public level, we had some delays in getting here, but it was really small compared to, once again, previous years. So the climate neutrality discussion on the public scale, large scale, started maybe around 2018, I would say, on really become mainstream in policies in Europe, in Western Europe, and now I think it's safe to say that, for instance, in Poland, it's also a kind of acceptable benchmark, and everyone knows that we have to get there sooner or later. So it's very fast catch up in the discussion. But to conclude, I think that we're still we see this benchmark. We know that we're going to get the discussion on timeline and means. But what's going to be this interesting part, that we're living in interesting times for climate policy, is that we'll now see Fit for 50 package and all the framework which is going to get us there, and everyone will have to also face all the challenges, but also opportunities of this rapid sectoral transition. So we are in very interesting times in terms of how each sector, each stakeholder will have to readjust. But at the same time, we have already strong foundation that we know that we have to get to net zero, and rather sooner than later. So interesting times ahead of us.
Interesting times indeed. Thank you so much, Alexander, for also your input. And then I would like to thank all of our distinguished speakers for being here today. And just to conclude, I hope that you would allow me just really briefly to also mention my organization, V4SDG, in this context. You might have seen me smiling at a few responses that came for several questions. It was because we are addressing these questions really in the past weeks and months, while we are now preparing for our new campaign, V4 at 30. And I was really happy to also see and hear your responses in several areas and in several ways, because we are now preparing a proposal package with our team that we will present just 1 week before the Hungarian V4 presidency starts. On the 21st of June, we will have a campaign kickoff, and now in the lead up to that, we are organizing closed expert consultations on multiple areas. And this is exactly because we believe that now, with the V4 turning 30, as also our distinguished speakers referred to that earlier, we really have now the potential to also include not just the governmental sector. Obviously, at the end of the day, they have the biggest say in how we turn more sustainable, but also with the involvement of the business sector and also the civil society and academia as well. I was really happy that, still, as you mentioned, also the role of the academia. I believe, and we believe, that really combining our efforts is the only way to take this path towards a more sustainable V4, and then also, as it was referred to by Mr. Erlős, also to show example to other regional actors and also outside the region to really take the lead on this sustainability transition. So with that, just also, please allow me to share one more logistical detail, that now we will have a coffee break until 12:30, and then we will continue on this link, so you can stay here, and then we will have a plenary session coming up at 2:35. So with that, thank you so much once again for our distinguished panelists, Stelios Grafakos, Alexander Slinyovsky, Mr. László Erlős, and Gabriela Fischerova. Thank you so much, and then see you after the break for the plenary session.